Carlton spent 12 years with the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, serving in several leadership positions, and including most recently acting vice president, training operations, and acting director for CADCA's National Coalition Institute, responsible for the day-to-day operation oversight, design, and implementation of the premier national training delivery system. Carlton also supported CADCA's international programs in partnership with the U.S. State Department's International Narcotics Law Enforcement Division, managing training programs in Kenya, South Africa, and Ghana. Carlton is one of the primary architects of CADCA's National Coalition Academy. The Academy, a year-long coalition development program, is designed to increase the effectiveness of communities in drug demand reduction, producing population-level outcomes. So let's give them a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Wow. So let me just start off by sharing just how grateful I am for this moment. All right? Here's the situation. We're living in a really interesting time. And that time has called for all of us, each of you, to make a decision. Give up your afternoon. Come and listen to somebody that you hadn't heard before, with the hope that maybe, just maybe, that investment of time will yield something that you might be able to take back and help the communities that you care so much about. I am honored to be here. I thank you for this tremendous privilege. I'm going to start off by saying thank you to Jeannie, and thank you to Melissa, and thank you to all of those who were responsible for putting this day together. Would you do me a favor and put your hands together and help me thank them for making this thing happen? And I didn't get her name, but the sponsor, whoever provided the money, because the money is always important, right? Thank you so very, very much for that. We have a little bit of time, and I have a few things that I want to share and a bit of a conversation that I'd like to have. Because part of what it is that I'm hoping that we'll be able to do over the next several moments is to have a bit of a conversation about what does it mean to bring transformative leadership to this thing that we refer to as prevention during this very unique time that we have in our nation, right? And so I start off with thanks, because quite frankly, the most interesting part of the day for me was when each of you went around and introduced yourselves. That rarely happens when I have this opportunity, and so thank you for doing that. And thank you all for sharing that, because it provided context, right? It provided context with which I'm going to speak into, that we're going to listen into, with respect to the work and this thing that we care so desperately about. Something that I believe wholeheartedly is that it not only takes a community to bring a solution to a problem, it takes a community first understand the context in which that problem is happening. And so, by virtue of listening to each of you introduce yourselves, the uniqueness, the variety of leadership that is represented in this room is profound. Everyone from educators to those who are supporting the efforts and recovery, to those who have responsibilities for agencies and resources, to those of you who are caring, concerned citizens and are just tired of some things happening the way they're happening and you want to bring about change. Elected leadership represented here. Thank you all for doing what you do, being who you are, and allowing me this opportunity to speak into that context. So, second time, give yourselves a round of applause for doing that. Because each of you represents kind of what I refer to as the bricks in that bridge. Because this unique time that we're in is requiring us to work together in ways that we've never had to work together before. Aren't you finding that? The silos are breaking down, and this thing that we've branded the opioid crisis is really requiring both public health and criminal justice to figure out how to work better together. And the cornerstone of that bridge is prevention. That's what will hold this together. And that's what I hope to be able to speak to, because here in this incredible region, you all have done some remarkable things. You have achieved some incredible successes and made some extraordinary strides. Everything from the Hope Not Handcuffs initiative that you all are providing for, and providing kind of a unique way of thinking about how can we deal with the stigma associated with this issue and this challenge. How can we make it easier for those that are in need of help and support to be able to get access to that help and support? How can we think about this differently to some of your ITAP initiatives, right? Where you're providing different kinds of opportunities for those who are involved with some of the challenges that we're here to speak about. Everything to extraordinary organizations like CAPE. I don't know if they are represented here in the room, but are providing some significant leadership around this issue. To, of course, this remarkable organization that is serving as the convener for this conversation. And you all have heard a lot of what it is that through those resources are being provided to this community, serving as the cornerstone for bringing all of those varied points of view and perspectives together to have this kind of a conversation so that we can figure out what to do from here. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being who you are and doing what you do. Because here's where this kind of came from. And the idea for this conversation, it came, I was delivering a keynote for the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children. Some of you may know of NADEC and are associated with this, but extraordinary organization that works with building communities and coalitions across the nation, all with its specific purposes of looking at what are the issues related to drug endangered children, as it relates in a number of areas that I'm sure many of the folks here in this room are familiar with. They've taken it upon themselves to form coalitions to try to form protection for children, prioritize children. About a couple months ago, the DEA released a report that indicated that the number of pills actually distributed in our country, the extraordinary numbers that we had thought they were, that have been reported, was actually much higher than was originally reported. Over 76 billion pills released. And if you think about that, what that shares, and this is a graphic of our country, and basically everywhere you see purple is in trouble. Right? And there's a lot of purple up on that graphic. But what it represents is a house that's in trouble, and I'm going to regress just a bit to share with you why this even came to me as a way of beginning our conversation. I have to share something with you. Just about 2.5 years ago, my life changed dramatically. My wife and I became grandparents for the first time. Absolutely. I'm saying dramatically. Sir, I peeped you out early on. We see each other, bro. We see each other. You know what I'm talking about, right? And here's the thing for those of you who don't know. When you become a grandparent, your entire world changes. Like the actual chemistry in your brain is altered. This is a fact. Here's the deal. I had no idea I would be feeling the way I'm feeling right now. But all I want to do right now is take my cell phone and show you pictures. That's all I want to do. Because here's the notion. It's like when you become a grandparent, it's like God comes to you and he gives you a gift. It says you can't open this until you become a grandparent. And when you open it, what you find is that there's a whole new level of love that you knew nothing about. And so my life changed. And so ever since then, my son, 2.5 years ago, it was March 30th. My son and his wife, who lived down in the Bronx, they gave me and my wife our first grandchild, a grandson, Ethan. Right? Then 10 days later, my daughter gave birth to twins. That's right, you do the math. In 10 days, we went from 0 to 3, just like that. I don't know how you all do it, but that's the way they do it in my family. Right? And so it's incredible. So my life has been nothing but evolving around those grandchildren. That's just the truth, right? My daughter married a Spaniard, so she lives in Spain. That's what happens when you marry a Spaniard. In the last 2 years, I've been to Spain 11 times. I got it bad. Somebody pray for me. Here's the deal. No, I can't afford it. Right, yes. But you just do what you gotta do. That's right. Here's the deal. You know what I'm talking about. When I go to their homes, whether it's my son's home or my daughter's home, this really crazy thing happens. I'm the grandfather, right? When grandfather comes in, they're supposed to, the waters are supposed to part, the horns are supposed to blow, right? You know where there's an honor, right? When I go to their homes, I find this very strange thing. I find that I can't get downstairs without risking my life. And for the life of me, I got a couple of degrees, but I have no idea how to open that thing. When I actually get downstairs, I can't get in the cabinet because I always have a snack, and I can't get in the daggone cabinet. And when I move around, I can't even charge my phone because I can't figure out how to put my phone charger in. And let me just share with you, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm over 50. I don't mean to be crude. But there are some things you don't want to upset and provide a restriction to. I'm just saying. So, here's the deal. Question. Who's the priority in this house?
Not you, apparently.
Not me, obviously. But who's the priority in this house? That's clear, right?
Yes.
That's obvious. Did they care about my feelings at all?
No.
Not in the least little bit, right? They didn't care about normalcy. They didn't care about subtlety. They cared about the safety of the children. Prevention should not care about normalcy. Prevention should not care about subtlety. Prevention should be overt. Prevention should be direct. Prevention should be intrusive. We have to do a better job of protecting our house and articulating who's the priority. Does that make sense to anybody in this room? So how do we go about doing that? A lot of this has come from the fact that I've had the great privilege of working with a number of federal agencies, including the Drug Enforcement Administration, on an initiative called the DEA 360 program. The DEA 360 program is geared towards really providing help, support, resources to communities trying to address the opioid issue and crisis in their communities through a whole set of resources and tools, much of which has to do with how do you engage the community in that conversation, right? I've had the privilege of working in a lot of cities and working all over trying to help do that. From that, I've gleaned some things that I think have some commonality that I think could help, some help and some support to our thinking here. And I saw some things working well and I saw some things not working well. Back in August of 2017, the CDC released a report. They've released several since, but they released a report. And in that report, they identified how severe the issue and the challenge has become nationally. And basically that everything has gotten worse and is continuing to get worse and that kind of thing, right? I'm not going to belabor the numbers, right? That was on, August 16th of 2017. On August 17th of 2017, this county's prosecutor decided that the issue was severe enough, they wanted to convene a meeting just like this, right? Let's have the community talk about that, right? You know you've lived around Washington too long when you start redacting everything. I'm sorry. Here's the deal. Can you tell me what's wrong with that picture?
Nobody there.
It's empty. In fact, I know these folks. And that woman right there works for that man, so it's actually even worse than it looks. Right? We have a crisis, but the crisis is a crisis of engagement. We have to have a new kind of conversation about how do we engage the broader community in this thing that we care desperately about. And so here's what I'm going to share with you. Dr. King, I think, said it best, right? He said, we are now faced and confronted with a fierce urgency of now. That fierce urgency of now. We live in a time when at the exact same time as the largest drug epidemic, the most devastating drug epidemic in our nation's history is taking place. At the exact same time, the greatest push for legalization is happening in our nation, right? Confluence of those two things is producing a really critical point for us, because our country is looking, seeking direction in leadership. Never before, or it's been a very long time, since we have had the attention and the spotlight on our field in the same way that we have it now. Does that make sense to folks? Folks are seeking understanding in this critical time, this fierce, urgent time. But I've come to understand that there are indeed some gaps that we need to identify in the current conversation that we're having as a nation. I'm going to share some of those with you as we have this conversation. And so there are a few things that I think will guide a different type of conversation that we need to have. First, we need to be clear about how we speak about ourselves in relationship to this crisis. We need clarity around that. Two, there are some gaps in the national conversation that I think actually provides some information, some guidance, some hints, if you will, about where we might be able to provide some strategic leverage with respect to our communities and our collaborations and the work that we're able to do. And so how should we speak about this? How should we talk about this? I'm going to start off by sharing this in this way. Hamjambo?
Jambo.
Ah, Jambo. Asante sana. Habari yenu?
Nazuri.
Ah, asante. Nivizuri sana kwa nyumbani. Ninyi ni watu wazuri? Mungu awabariki. Mambo sawa sawa. Mambo sawa sawa. Mambo sawa sawa.
Mambo sawa
Oh,
sawa.
come on, Mambo sawa sawa, y'all. all right. Very good. I'm not gonna belabor that point. Share with me. First of all, hold on, because I'm not going to get through this without him having me the whole time.
Oh my God, what are we doing here?
Good to see you. So here's the question. Anybody recognize the language I was speaking? It was Swahili. Yes, sir. And so I represent the first person in my family who has had the opportunity to touch the continent of Africa. And not only touch the continent of Africa, but I actually spent a good bit of time working with communities in Kenya and throughout Africa. And I found that I had a propensity for a language I've never heard before. It was a life-changing experience for me. And so basically what I said is I said, hello. I said, how are you? He said hello back, she said hello back. I said, thank you. I said, you all were beautiful to me. I don't know the word for handsome, I'm sorry about that. I said, thank you for making me feel at home. I said, I'm excited, let's get started. God bless you all. I'm excited, let's get started. I'm excited, let's get started. Was there anything wrong with what I said? Of course not. But it didn't elicit the response, why? Exactly. I work with community after 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 community. Everywhere I've ever touched, there is no shortage of individuals who are there, desperate to be involved, desperate to be engaged, desperate to find a way to make a difference, desperate to find a way to do something that has possibly damaged their own family or their own lives in some way. And what do we say when they come to us and they ask us, how can I help? We say, you can do the strategic prevention framework. The strategic prevention framework is a 5-phase process, and that 5-phase process can help you to work through this whole thing. Or, if you don't like that, there's another 5-phase process called communities that care. Communities that care is another 5-phase process. That 5-phase process can take you from keyword orientation all the way through strategic planning. If you don't like that, there's another 5-phase process. That 5-phase process It's called collective impact. Collective impact will help you work through a backbone organization to help you bring about change throughout the effort. So you can do that, but you have to know the social ecological model. Social ecological model can help you to understand the social development strategy, and the social development strategy can also bring you back to the social ecological model in that kind of way. It's all a circle. It's all a circle. But if you do that and do that well, then you can have an asset-based community development process and framework, and that asset-based community development can't be understood unless you understand the 40 developmental assets, and those 40 developmental assets needs to be guided by a social investment strategy. That social investment strategy won't mean a doggone thing without understanding the social determinants of health. You gotta understand the social determinants of health, and if you do that and do that well enough, then maybe we can understand screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. If you have all of that in place, then we can have health in all policies, and if you put health in all policy, you have to put it all into context. Right? And don't get me wrong, please don't misunderstand what I am sharing. I'm a preventionist. I believe in that wholeheartedly. As a preventionist, I believe in three things directly. One, I believe the best way to solve any issue, solve any problem, is to make sure that you deal with that problem before it becomes a problem. That's number one. Number two, I believe in the full engagement and empowerment of the community to understanding that problem, being part of a solution. And number three, I believe in being guided by science in order to produce population-level results. I'm a preventionist. I believe in that wholeheartedly. I've had the privilege of working with many of those who have developed these extraordinary frameworks and tools. But I want to be clear, that's what they are. They are tools. They aren't the entirety of the answer. Does that make sense to anyone? I love to garden. Or rather, I love a good garden. Right? My neighbor has a beautiful garden. I look and see the tools my neighbor has. I get in my car, I drive to Home Depot, I buy the exact same tools. I come back, and let's just say my garden still doesn't look like my neighbor's garden. Right? Why? Because it's not merely about the tools. Does that make sense to anyone? Right? You have to understand that prevention is more than a science. Prevention is a craft. It's a craft that allows for all of us to get better at building that skill set. And that's where I want to go with respect to this conversation. So how do we do that? We do that by asking and answering simple questions. Like, what is it that we need to do? How should we go about doing it? And most importantly, why do we do it this way? Why is it impossible for us to create change by continuing to do things the same way we've always done it? Simple questions. But simple questions have a very, very different way of operating depending on how you ask the question. Would you all mind playing a quick game with me? Just a really, really quick game if I promise there's a little point to it? Would you all mind doing that? All right, I know it's late. I know it's late, Newburgh. I know it's late. Right, but if you promise to do that, let me just, I promise you to be quick and painless. Your tablecloths. What color are your tablecloths? I promise you no trick questions, all right? How do you spell right? Very good. I'm going to ask you, what color is the tablecloth? I want you to say white 3 times. I want you to spell it 3 times. Say white again. At the end of that, I'm going to ask you a very simple question, and we'll see what we come up with. Are you game? Yes. What color is the tablecloth? White. W-H-I-T-E, 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 right. What do cows drink?
Water.
Very clever.
Now, I realize I'm just a city kid, and there aren't very many cows where I come from. When's the last time you all saw a cow drink a glass of milk? Why did I do that? I did that for 2 reasons. And I want to thank my friends who have heard me do that before for holding themselves back. I know it was tough on you. Did that for two reasons. One is because when I was first introduced to this work, a man by the name of Dr. Khalifa Ramadan, he stood in front of the room, he did that, and you can see I'm a very shy, introverted type. Right? I was so excited about my answer, I actually jumped up and yelled, "White milk!" Now, it's one thing to be wrong, it's another thing to both loud and wrong at the same time. But the other reason I did that is because it was an exercise in conditioning, and what I did is I just simply used 30 seconds to condition us to think about the color white, and based upon that conditioning, I asked us a very simple question that, if we are honest, many of us got very wrong, but that's okay. What happens in Newburgh will stay in Newburgh, right? How often are the responses that we are providing to our communities that are asking those simple questions of us, how often are they based upon how we've been conditioned to think? Because here's the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is everybody here in the room knew what the answer was. We all knew the answer. But what did it require? It required us to stop, to think first, and then respond, right? The most important thing you are doing with this gathering is you are getting a whole community together to stop these activities that you just did. Represented you thinking first and then offering a response. Simon Sinek, many of you know who he is. He's turned into this kind of guru around leadership and management and change and efforts, and he kind of gone viral a number of times, and so many of you have been familiar with him. He has a book called Start With Why. He shared an interesting thought that I thought was very pronounced for our field. He said, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. We are extraordinary at telling folks what we do. We can even tell them how we do it. We are horrible at explaining why we are doing it. The why behind who we are and what it is that we do. Have you ever been to Thanksgiving dinner and family members ask you what you all do? And then try to answer that question like within 10, 15 minutes, right? Communities are not engaging with us because they are having a hard time understanding what prevention is for them and how they can engage in prevention itself. We've got to get better at understanding and helping them understand why we do what we do, right? Many of you are familiar with the river story. The river story about two men standing on the banks of a river, going fishing, and as they're fishing, they find a child drowning in the middle of the river. One of the guys throws down their pole, jumps in the river, swims out, grabs the young man, and pulls him to the shore. They call a very expensive ambulance, and they have that child nursed to help him carry it off. Next day they go out, and this time there are two children drowning in the same place. This time both men drop their poles, jump into the river, swim out, bring them to the shore, call two very expensive ambulances, and they get help. Next day they go out, and this time there are 8. Next day they go out, this time there are 12. Next day they go out, this time there are 15, and far too many for them to save. So tragedy happens. And they do a lot of things around the banks of the river. They put up signs, they put up a fence, they put up no swimming allowed, they make all kinds of rules and all kinds of assumptions about the children. And they still see more and more and more drowning in the same place. It's not until they go upstream, and many of you are already aware of where I was going with this story, and they find out the reason why the young men or women are falling into the river is because they are at a school that is dangerously positioned right next to a precipice, right? And every time they go out to recess, of course, they get too close to the edge, and these are the children that fall off. Now, with that bit of information, where do they assign all of their attention and resources? Not to the river, but upstream, where they are preventing them from falling into the river in the first place. If you don't remember anything else I say tonight, we must become to prevent them from falling into the river in the first place, folk. Does that make sense to people here? Because here's what the reality is that we're dealing with. Back in 2015, we had a thing where we looked at it, 91 Americans every day were overdosing from this challenge. That was in 2015. 2016, of course, that number went up to 115, right? 2017, we got up to 200 a day, 200 a day. That's the equivalent of a mid-sized commercial aircraft, right? Crashing every single day. And the number is much more nefarious than that, because it doesn't represent merely the crash. It represents that as that crash happened, we already know that there's another 200 lined up to take that same flight the next day. Does that make sense to folks? Yes. So unless we do something about disrupting the queue, disrupting the line, how many of you will recognize with me that all the search and rescue that we're doing, yes, it's important, yes, it's necessary, yes, it's absolutely essential, but it will never stop the challenges and the questions that we have, right? And so part of what it is that we have to do is we have to figure out how do we make sure that we are able to disrupt that queue. And so, you all, this is nothing new to this extraordinary county that you're living in, right? And we recognize that there are indeed challenges that you are facing that are unique, possibly because of where you're positioned, possibly for a whole host of reasons. But we know that as we're seeing some progress being made in other parts of the state, here in this county, we've seen that there's an increase that has happened in the last year. With respect to naloxone usage, we've seen that there's also an increase. With respect to our emergency visits, emergency department visits, more than double the average rate outside of this county and other parts of the state. So there's an issue, there's a challenge that we have to contend with, despite the great work that is being done here. Here's the current situation. Current situation, as you all are pretty familiar with, is that we're seeing that the synthetic opioid rates are continuing to drive this challenge across our nation. We're seeing that if we look a bit deeper, that what's really going on, according to the CDC, is that we're dealing with a crisis that has actually 3 waves to that crisis. The first wave, of course, happened as a result of the overprescribing practices that were taking place for a number of years, that many of our communities were the first to kind of raise their hands and shout and say, hey, there's something nefarious going on here. What's going on? What's happening, right? And then somewhere around 2010, we saw a resurgence in heroin, kind of driving a lot of the overdoses and the deaths that were occurring nationally. Why? Because you saw that folks that were then addicted to the pills are able to access the pills because of pricing and that kind of thing. We're looking to a cheaper alternative. And then we're seeing that has then yielded to a third wave that has occurred because of the synthetics, fentanyl, carfentanil, and the like, kind of driving the overdose issues and challenges that we're seeing across our nation. Here's the only thing that I want you to get from this slide, from this picture. If there are 3 waves, if there were 3 waves, what's the one thing I know for sure as a result of looking at this picture? Anybody? Say it loudly now.
There's going to be a 4th.
There's going to be a 4th, right? And in fact, that's already occurring. We're seeing a great deal of increase around overdose deaths involving psychostimulants, which are currently following the same kind of trend that you all have looked at and seen, that are all too familiar with us. And we're also setting up a very dangerous pattern. If you look at this, the policymakers in Washington, D.C., and I'm so happy that you have extraordinary champions that decided that they were going to make it their business to have representation here. But for the most part, our policymakers in D.C. are continuing to drive the bulk of their funding towards an opiate issue only. We're missing the vote. So we have to do a better job of raising the level of the conversation around and about this. The President of the United States once said, one problem meriting special attention deals with the growing abuse of non-narcotic drugs, including barbiturates and amphetamines. Here's the most important point that he said. Society's gains will be illusory if we reduce the incidence of one kind of drug dependence only to have new kinds of drugs substituted. Anybody in here tired of playing whack-a-mole? Right? Is the issue this? Is the issue that? We thought it was this, now it's that. As a community, as a society, we have to get out of that practice, and there's a way of thinking about this. And you might have gathered that this is not the words of our current president, nor are they the words of our most recent past president. These are the words of President John F. Kennedy, who said this 2 weeks after I was born in 1980. We are now at a point where we're seeing upwards of every man, woman, child in our nation having the ability to have access to 63 pills a day for a month. Or 63 pills a month. Right? Is the cat going up or down? The right got you all nervous now, huh? Here's the deal. Let me tell you which way the cat's going. Cat's going anywhere I decide it's going, okay? And part of what it is that we have to do is we have to decide what's going on in our country, what's going on in our nation, the direction that we are taking in our nation. Because here's what the evidence, here's what the truth is, here's what the data show us. What I'm looking at, what I'm showing you is a report that suggests that when we look at the data of high school seniors reporting past substance use from 1975 all the way through 2016, you can see the trend lines, right? It's going in a positive direction. Use among youth have been going down. That's good news. That's a result of your work, your efforts. You see that green line? The green line represents marijuana, right? You can see that it was going down, and then all of a sudden now it's going in a different direction. And I would suggest to you that much of that is because of the normalizing that is taking place within our society around marijuana use in a way that provides a very different association with the use of that topic. Here's a better idea and a better picture of it. If you look at those high school seniors who just said that we are going to abstain from all use of alcohol, cigarettes, and marijuana and other illicits. These are the young people that said, I'm not involved with it at all. That trend line is going in a positive direction. Bottom line, our goal, our job is to get that line to continue to go in that direction and to get even better, and it is possible to be able to do that. This has to do with alcohol, and you can say the same thing is taking place. What I'm sharing with you is that prevention has been working. But that's not the news you are receiving when you turn on your television set or when you listen to most of the interviews that are taking place around the subject that we are discussing, right? Much of what you've heard is something that's referred to as the war on drugs, which is what? What is the war on drugs done? Say it out loud. Failed is what we continue to hear constantly. And what I am sharing with you is evidence that, quite frankly, just the opposite. We are achieving some significant successes in broad ways, but we're not speaking of those successes. We're not articulating those successes that we are indeed having. We are not failing, we are learning as we go through this process. And part of what it is that I want us to make sure that we're able to focus on is that somehow, with respect to this crisis, we have to avoid making the same mistakes over and over again, because this is not the first national drug epidemic that we've had as a nation, right? We've been here before. So we want to make sure that we are not missing the point. Dr. Bob DuPont once shared with us that for many opioid-addicted individuals, drug use began in early adolescence with the use of alcohol, marijuana, and other drugs. Here's the critical point. Early poly-drug use often sets the stage for that later transition from medical to addictive patterns of use. We don't, forgive me, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, then I'm going to drive back home, but I'm going to say it. We don't have an opiate crisis. We have a poly-drug recreational crisis on our hands. Does that make sense to anybody in this room? A commercial poly-drug recreational use crisis. Here's the thing. Let me share with you, and I'm going to be done. I want you to read this statement out loud. Okay? I'm going to flash it on the screen. Read out loud, please. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, why did that happen? That happened because our brains are wired in a very specific way. Our brains are wired to fill in missing pieces of information so that we can make quick decisions, right? It was embedded in us, right? It's the reason why, way back in the day, if we heard something rustling in the bush, I didn't have to see that tiger, right? I'd hear the bush and I'd run, right? Even today when I'm driving, sometimes I get on automatic. Anybody get on automatic pilot? You find you're like halfway home before you realize, hey, I was supposed to stop at a store, right? Because our brains are starting working. Read this out loud. Read this.
This message serves to prove how our minds can do amazing things and prosperous things in the beginning of the talk.
Stop! It doesn't say that at all. Right? It doesn't. Your brain will not let you read this differently, right? It is automatically filling in those pieces. We are geared that way. I would suggest that our nation is having a conversation about this crisis in the same way that may have us jumping to conclusions, right? There are three ways in which that's happening. One, how is the medical use of opioids differing distinctly from the addictive patterns of use? How are non-addicted patients transitioning? We have to pay attention to that. Two, we have to do a better job of connecting the role of opioids in overdose deaths to the wider pattern, and here's the point I was trying to make earlier, the wider pattern of non-medical recreational poly-drug use. And third, there is a significant role of adolescent initiation of drug use to the opioid addiction that's happening at older ages. 90% of all of those who are working and living and wrestling with their life in the addictive patterns of use, 90% will suggest that they started in adolescence. 90% will say that, right? Where do we work? We work with adolescents. That's in our wheelhouse. There is much that we can do. There is so much I want to share. The substance use disorder prevention and treatment efforts progression, contrary to popular misconception, is not merely by medical initiation to opiate use disorder. The vast majority of persons with opiate use disorder has had previous troubles with other substances. The vast majority, right? All I'm trying to say is that as severe, as devastating as the opiate issue is in this county, in this region, as devastating as the deaths that are occurring and the overdoses that are happening and the devastation to our families is taking place here, by focusing exclusively to the exclusion of everything else, we are doing the same. It's called search and rescue. But we are not doing anything about the line that's forming to take their places. Does that make sense to anybody here in the room? And the only thing that I am charged with, the only reason why I was so happy to receive this invitation, was to come to your great community and try to enlist you in this goal that I have, which is to engage our community to having a broader conversation about this issue and this crisis. That we have to do more than look at it as merely an issue about pills. Yes, pills are vital to the crisis and challenging for us. My brother Khalil passed from sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is a disease that causes chronic pain. So my brother, who was no more than like 100 pounds soaking wet as an adult, right? But he had a personality like he was Chris Rock, Chris Tucker, and Jimmy J.J. Walker all rolled up into one, right? So he had a personality that's bigger than life, which meant that everybody knew Khalil. Khalil had every kind of opioid you can imagine. In my neighborhood, where I grew up, where I'm coming from, you didn't go to a pharmacist. You didn't go to a doctor. You didn't go to a pharmacy. You went to Khalil. And the dangerous thing about that is that nobody understood how dangerous or wrong that practice is and was. If you look at the data, more than 54% of those who have found to have had an overdose would suggest that their source of that pill or those pills that they took was from family and friends. Right? Not from doctor shopping, family and friends. How much of our national dialogue has been about doctor shopping? A lot. Right? The gray represents family or friends. That little tiny sliver over there to the side represents doctor shopping. That's what the data show. So, all that being said, here we go. I'm offering us an opportunity to reframe how we're thinking about prevention in and during this time. Here's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we're looking at prevention in these three areas. We absolutely need to make sure that we're doing everything we can with helping folks to prevent overdoses and deaths, including the Narcan training that's getting ready to start. 2, we have to do more with working with our recovery community. Far too long, recovery and those of us in prevention have been working on two very different islands. How many of you will recognize and agree with me that we need each other? We need to learn from each other. There are things that we need to understand from each other in order to more effectively address this issue. So we can do what we refer to as relapse prevention. And then lastly, we have to spend a lot more of our opportunity, a lot more of our time, a lot more of our resources for those elected officials, representatives here in our room. Primary prevention needs your support. Please take that charge back and carry it and champion it, as I know you are already doing because I did my research before I came. Here's the deal. Here's the deal. This needs your help, your support, your work. I'm getting through all of this. Here's the deal. We've been working in these very siloed areas. But we are now forced to have conversations together, which is what this is really providing for us all. In order to do that, and to do that well, we have to understand how to articulate why it matters so much. Because people don't buy what we do. We have program after program after program after program. They buy why we do it. I read a book called The Autobiography of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I was struck by it because I never knew Dr. King to have written an autobiography. And he actually did. Dr. Claiborne Carson from Stanford University was charged by the family to pull together all of Dr. King's writings. And because they were all Dr. King's writings, all Dr. King's words, when he put the book together, he referred to it as an autobiography because it was all Dr. King's words. As I was reading that book, I was struck by the fact I was probably reading the notes of probably the greatest coalition leader our nation has ever seen. Someone once asked him, "Why is it that you keep doing this?" This was his response. He related it again during his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance. He says, "I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, freedom for their spirits." Dr. King was a master at sharing what he believed, his why. And people bought his why. Dr. King never gave the "I have a plan" speech. I'm so very, very proud to have this opportunity. I hope some of these words meant something and could connect in some way with you, because I see each of you as standing on the shoulders of Dr. King, with who you are and who you've chosen to be. Therefore, I have audacious faith in each and every one of you. So on behalf of Ethan Courtney and the twins, Valentina Maria and Carmen Renee, protect our house. God bless you all.